A black man walks into a hotel he owns but is treated like a trespasser. His name is David Carter, yet the staff don't see a successful entrepreneur, they only see his skin color. Judged solely on his appearance, David becomes the target of subtle glances, dismissive smirks, and whispered insults. What the staff doesn't realize is that their behavior is about to ignite a storm that will uncover a truth they cannot escape. This isn't just about David, it's a confrontation with a system where prejudice thrives, appearances determine value, and justice is often denied. What happens next will shatter assumptions and force a reckoning with the way we view fairness and equality. Before we dive into this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, let's get started. David Carter stood outside the Grand Carter Imperial Hotel, gazing up at its polished facade. The building gleamed with pristine glass and golden accents, a testament to his years of hard work and vision. But today wasn't about admiring success. It was about uncovering the reality behind the luxury. Dressed in simple jeans and a plain jacket, David blended into the crowd of everyday guests. He chose this attire intentionally, knowing firsthand how quickly assumptions were made based on appearances. He thought back to his past, moments of blatant prejudice, subtle exclusions, and whispered doubts about his abilities. As he stepped inside, the air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint aroma of expensive coffee. Guests walked by, some greeted warmly by the staff. But when David approached the front desk, there was no smile, no "Welcome to the Carter Imperial." Instead, Ryan, the receptionist, barely lifted his head, his tone flat and uninterested. "Can I help you?" In that brief moment, David felt the familiar sting of being judged, not as the man who built this empire, but as someone unworthy of its spaces. David took a deep breath, suppressing the sharp sting of Ryan's dismissive tone. "I'd like to book a room," he said, his voice steady. Ryan barely glanced at the screen, tapping a few keys without interest. After a moment, he looked up and shrugged. "Sorry, all rooms are booked," he replied curtly. David knew it was a lie. The hotel's system showed availability. He had insured it earlier. "Could you check again?" "I believe I made a reservation," David said politely, though his patience was wearing thin. Ryan sighed, this time tapping the keyboard with exaggerated reluctance. Jessica, standing nearby, whispered loud enough for David to hear. "What's the point? He probably can't afford it anyway." Her words were sharp, cutting deeper than the coldness in Ryan's voice. David caught her smirk, a fleeting expression of quiet arrogance that spoke volumes. The receptionist's face lit up with a mocking smile. "Nope, no reservation here. Maybe you should try somewhere else," Ryan said, leaning back in his chair as if dismissing David entirely. This was no coincidence. David recognized the familiar script of exclusion, polished professionalism for some, open disdain for others. Staying calm, he pressed further. "Can I speak to your manager?" he asked firmly. Jessica stepped forward. "We don't need to bother the manager with this," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. She turned to Ryan, muttering, "Maybe we should just call security." Ryan nodded, pulling out a phone as Jessica looked back at David, her expression a mixture of pity and defiance. "Sir, you're making things difficult for everyone. You need to leave," she said loudly, drawing attention from nearby guests. David stood his ground. "I have the right to be here. I've done nothing wrong," he replied, his voice calm but unwavering. The tension in the lobby was palpable, a sharp contrast to the polished chandeliers and gleaming floors. Moments later, 2 security guards arrived, their presence towering and imposing. One of them, a burly man with a stern expression, addressed David without hesitation. "You've been asked to leave, sir. We'll escort you out," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. David's heart pounded, but he stood his ground, refusing to be intimidated. "I have a reservation. I'm not leaving until this is resolved," he said, meeting the guard's gaze. The second guard stepped closer, his voice harsher. "If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have to use force," he warned, grabbing David's arm. That single act of aggression felt like the culmination of every subtle insult, every microaggression David had endured. David pulled his arm free, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not going anywhere." His defiance echoed through the lobby, silencing the murmurs of onlookers. The security guard tightened his grip on David's arm, his towering presence meant to intimidate. David remained unshaken, his voice steady yet commanding. "Take your hand off me," he said firmly. The lobby fell silent as the crowd of guests turned to watch the unfolding scene. Their murmurs created an undercurrent of tension that seemed to amplify every second. Ryan, still behind the desk, stepped forward, frustration etched on his face. "Sir, you've caused enough disruption. Leave now, or we'll have to escalate this further," he said, trying to sound professional but failing to mask his irritation. David didn't budge. Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate. The guard stiffened, as though bracing for conflict. What David pulled out, however, wasn't a threat, it was a sleek black wallet. With a measured motion, he retrieved an ID card and held it up, the hotel's golden insignia glinting under the bright lights. "I am David Carter," he said, his voice calm but cutting through the tension like a blade. "I own this hotel." The room froze. Ryan's expression turned from irritation to disbelief. Jessica, who had been whispering moments earlier, now stood motionless, her confident smirk wiped away. The security guards exchanged uneasy glances, stepping back slightly, their authority suddenly diminished. David lowered his ID but didn't move. His piercing gaze met Ryan's. "You didn't even ask for my name. You didn't bother checking the system. Instead, you judged me, dismissed me, because of how I look." The words echoed through the room, sharp and unrelenting. Ryan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Jessica's face turned pale as she stammered. I didn't mean. It's not what it looks like." David didn't let her finish. "It's exactly what it looks like," he said firmly. "This isn't about one mistake. It's about a culture, one that allows people like you to decide who belongs and who doesn't, based solely on appearances." Jessica stepped back, her confidence replaced with visible discomfort. "I didn't mean any harm," she muttered, her voice trembling. David turned his gaze to her. "You didn't mean harm, but you caused it anyway. And that's exactly why this has to change." The tension in the lobby was suffocating. Onlookers whispered among themselves, their expressions a mixture of shock and curiosity. The once luxurious ambience of the Carter Imperial Hotel now felt cold and uninviting. Before anyone could speak again, the hotel manager, Mr. Grant, appeared, hurrying across the lobby. His face was flushed, his demeanor panicked. "Mr. Carter," he called out, his voice a mix of embarrassment and desperation. "I just heard. I'm so sorry for this unacceptable situation." David turned to him slowly. "This isn't about apologies," he said, his tone even but resolute. "How often does this happen when I'm not here? How many other guests have been mistreated or turned away because of how they look?" Mr. Grant swallowed hard, his composure slipping. "I assure you, this behavior is not representative of our values. We'll take immediate action, retraining, policy changes, whatever it takes to ensure this never happens again." David raised an eyebrow. "Not representative of your values? Then why was it so easy for your staff to act this way? Why did it feel natural for them to dismiss me without a second thought?" The manager's face turned crimson as he struggled for words. Around them, the guests were no longer just watching, they were listening, their murmurs quieter now as they absorbed David's words. "This isn't just about me," David continued, his voice carrying across the room. "This is about every person who walks through these doors. Every guest deserves dignity and respect. That shouldn't depend on the color of their skin or the clothes they're wearing." Jessica's head hung low, her earlier arrogance replaced with visible shame. Ryan looked at the floor, his shoulders slumped. Even the security guards seemed smaller now, their earlier dominance gone. David turned back to Mr. Grant. "I built this hotel to represent excellence. to show what's possible when we embrace diversity and reject prejudice. But right now, it's clear that vision hasn't reached everyone here. The manager nodded quickly. We'll rebuild that vision, Mr. Carter. I promise you, retraining will start immediately. Policies will be reviewed and updated. And I will personally oversee these changes. David's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. Good. Because this isn't about damage control, it's about accountability. Words are easy. Real change is harder, but it's necessary. A ripple of agreement seemed to pass through the crowd. Some guests nodded subtly, others whispered among themselves. David's presence commanded attention, his words forcing them to confront the reality of what they had just witnessed. Jessica finally broke the silence. I'm sorry, she said quietly, her voice cracking. I didn't realize. That's the problem, David said, looking directly at her. You didn't realize. And until you do, until you understand the impact of your assumptions, nothing will change. He turned to the crowd, his final words ringing with purpose. This isn't just about today. It's about tomorrow. Respect isn't optional, it's the bare minimum. And I won't settle for anything less in my hotel. The guests began to disperse, some looking introspective, others avoiding eye contact. The lobby, once a symbol of luxury, now felt like the backdrop to a reckoning, a moment of clarity that would leave an indelible mark. The lobby had quieted, but the weight of the moment lingered heavily in the air. David stood at the center, his gaze steady as he turned to face the staff and Mr. Grant. The once confident expressions of Ryan and Jessica had crumbled entirely. The guards stood awkwardly to the side, their presence diminished. This is bigger than what happened today, David began, his tone calm but firm. It's about a mindset, a culture, that allows people to be judged and dismissed simply because of how they look. He paused, letting the words sink in. Ryan opened his mouth to speak, but David raised a hand to stop him. Don't apologize again, he said. What I need from you isn't remorse, it's understanding. Understanding how your actions, your assumptions, affect others. Jessica, visibly shaken, asked quietly, what can we do to make this right? Her question hung in the air, a faint glimmer of hope amidst the discomfort. You can start by looking at yourselves, David said, his voice softening slightly. Ask yourself why it was so easy to judge me. Ask yourself how many others you've treated the same way. And then make a choice to do better, not because you're forced to, but because it's the right thing to do. The words seemed to weigh on everyone present. Mr. Grant, standing nearby, nodded earnestly. We will change, Mr. Carter. This hotel will reflect your vision, your values. I'll make sure of it. David's gaze softened as he turned toward the guests who had lingered to watch. And to everyone here, he said, addressing them directly, I hope this moment stays with you. I hope it makes you think about how we treat each other, not just in places like this, but everywhere. Respect and fairness shouldn't depend on someone's status or appearance. They should be universal. The guests murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement. A man in the corner, who had been watching intently, stepped forward. Thank you for saying that, he said, his voice earnest. I've seen things like this happen, but I've never known how to respond. You've given me a lot to think about. David nodded, his expression thoughtful. It starts with awareness, he replied. When we recognize the problem, we can start to change it. But it takes more than words, it takes action. He turned back to Mr. Grant, his demeanor once again firm. This hotel can't just be a place of luxury, it has to be a place of integrity. Every guest, no matter who they are, should feel welcome here. That starts with you and your team. Mr. Grant swallowed, his face pale but determined. We'll do everything we can to rebuild trust, Mr. Carter. I promise. David nodded, then stepped away from the center of the room, moving toward a quiet corner to gather his thoughts. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see Sophia's name on the screen. Smiling faintly, he answered. Hi, Sophia, he said, his voice calmer now. I heard what happened, she replied, her tone both concerned and supportive. "Are you okay?" David exhaled deeply. "I'm fine. It's just frustrating, you know? After everything we've worked for, moments like this remind me how far we still have to go." Sophia's voice softened. "I know it's hard, David. But what you did today, it matters. You stood up, not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel small. That's not just important, it's powerful." Her words settled over him like a warm embrace. "Sometimes I wonder if it's enough," David admitted. "If one moment, one confrontation, can really change anything." "It's a start," Sophia said. "Every step forward matters." "You've always believed that." David smiled, a small but genuine expression. "You're right. It's a start." He ended the call, his mind calmer now. Looking around the lobby, he saw the faces of the staff and guests, some still processing, others whispering quietly among themselves. It wasn't just about today. This was the beginning of something bigger. Turning back to Mr. Grant, David spoke one last time. "I'll be back to check on the progress," he said, his tone steady but clear. "This isn't just a lesson for today. It's a commitment to do better, every single day." Mr. Grant nodded solemnly. "We'll make it happen, Mr. Carter. I give you my word." David looked at the staff one last time before walking toward the exit. Every step he took felt like a declaration, a reminder that change wasn't just possible, but necessary. David Carter stepped out of the Carter Imperial Hotel, the cool evening air brushing against his face. For a moment, he stood still, gazing at the glowing hotel sign bearing his name. It was a symbol of everything he had worked for, yet tonight, it had reminded him of how much further there was to go. His mind replayed the events of the day, the dismissive glances, the whispered insults, the outright refusal to see him as anything more than an outsider. Each moment cut deep, but they also reinforced his resolve. This wasn't just about him. It was about a system that needed to change, and today had been one small step in the right direction. As he walked toward his car, the weight of his responsibility felt heavier than ever. He thought of the countless people who had experienced what he faced today but lacked the voice, the platform, or the power to push back. How many people have walked into places like this and been turned away? He wondered. How many left feeling invisible, unworthy, or small? David paused by his car, staring at the reflection of the hotel's grand facade in the window. His father's words came back to him. "Your success isn't just for you, it's for everyone who comes after you. Use it to open doors for others." Those words had been a guiding light throughout his life, and today, they felt more important than ever. Inside the hotel, the staff were still processing what had unfolded. Ryan and Jessica had retreated to the break room, their earlier confidence replaced by quiet shame. The guards stood near the lobby doors, speaking in hushed tones, their rigid postures softened. Meanwhile, the guests whispered among themselves, their expressions a mix of sympathy and reflection. David knew that change wouldn't happen overnight. But he also knew that moments like this were necessary. They were catalysts, small but significant sparks that could ignite something greater. Sliding into the driver's seat, David sat for a moment, letting the silence envelop him. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see a message from Sophia. "Proud of you. Let me know when you're on your way." Smiling faintly, he called her. "Hi," he said, his voice softer now. "Hey," Sophia replied, her tone filled with both concern and pride. "How are you holding up?" David exhaled deeply. "I'm okay. Just tired. Today was a lot." "I can imagine," Sophia said gently. "But what you did, it matters, David. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong." Her words settled over him like a warm blanket. "Sometimes I wonder if it's enough," he admitted. "If moments like this really make a difference." "It's a start," Sophia replied firmly. "Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens one step at a time, and today, you took a big one." David smiled, her unwavering support giving him the strength he needed. "Thank you," he said simply. for always believing in me." As the call ended, David looked back at the hotel one last time. The glowing lights, the bustling lobby, it all looked so polished on the surface. But beneath that sheen, there was work to be done, and he was determined to see it through. Starting the engine, he pulled onto the quiet street, the hum of the car filling the silence. His thoughts drifted to the future, to the battles yet to come. He knew this wouldn't be the last time he faced prejudice, but each confrontation was an opportunity to demand better, to inspire others, and to create the change the world so desperately needed. David's journey wasn't just about running a successful hotel. It was about challenging the very foundations of injustice. He wanted the Carter Imperial to stand for more than luxury. It had to be a place where everyone, regardless of their background, felt valued and respected. David's story is a powerful reminder that progress doesn't come without effort. It requires courage to confront what's wrong and determination to fight for what's right. Moments like these challenge us to reflect on our own biases and push for a world where fairness and respect are universal. If this story resonated with you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to stay connected with stories that inspire change. Together, we can amplify these voices and build a better future. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.